Have you ever given your heart to someone, only to find out they were never honest with theirs? Imagine falling in love with someone who listens when no one else does, who sees the quiet parts of you, the ones you've kept hidden for years, who waits, gently, until you're ready to give them everything. Now imagine discovering it all started as a bet. Claire Whitmore, a woman who had guarded her heart and body for years, chose to trust again. Jonas Walker, a man who never lost, chose her. But what began as a game turned into something far more fragile. And just when she gave herself completely, the truth shattered everything. What would you do if the love you believed in was built on a lie? Could you ever learn to trust again? Could they ever earn your forgiveness, not with words, but with actions? This is not just a story of betrayal. It's a story of healing, of choices, of a man learning to become worthy, and a woman choosing to live not for what was lost, but for what could still be found. Stay with us, like, share, and subscribe to join us on this journey, because sometimes the quietest love stories echo the loudest. The morning light filtered softly through the tall windows of Jonas Walker's office. Outside, Austin buzzed with the familiar rhythm of commerce, traffic, and opportunity. But inside the top floor of Walker & Co., there was only silence and the lingering scent of dark roast coffee. Jonas stood by the glass, arms crossed, watching a hawk glide effortlessly over the hills. 46, with a salt and pepper beard that made him look more thoughtful than his reputation allowed. Jonas was the kind of man who didn't lose often, and certainly never twice. "Tell me again why you look like you just swallowed bad whiskey," Tom Ridley said, walking in with 2 cups in hand. Tom, his closest friend and attorney of 20 years, placed the coffee on the walnut desk and raised an eyebrow. Jonas didn't answer. His gaze stayed fixed on the skyline. "She turned you down?" Tom asked, half laughing. "Flat out," Jonas muttered, finally turning around. "No, thank you. No, maybe next week. Just no." Tom chuckled, then took a long sip. "Claire Whitmore is not your average date. Jonas, she's smart, quiet, and probably immune to charm, especially your type." "I wasn't charming her," Jonas shot back, but his tone betrayed him. "I asked her to dinner. She said she doesn't mix work and distractions. Her word. That's polite code for 'I see right through you.'" Tom grinned. Jonas leaned against his desk. "She's coming out to the ranch next week to look at the renovation. She doesn't know I own it. Let me guess. You're planning something?" "No, but I made a promise." Tom narrowed his eyes. "To who? To myself." Jonas said, "6 months from now, she'll be my wife." The room went quiet. "You're serious?" Tom asked. "I've never been more serious." Tom exhaled slowly, sitting down. "You know, marriage isn't a game piece on a board. Jonas, people get hurt." Jonas nodded, but his eyes were unreadable. "That's why I'll do it right. No shortcuts." Tom looked at him carefully. "What's this really about?" Jonas picked up the coffee, his voice quieter now. "Maybe I'm tired of waking up to empty." There was something in the way he said it. Not loneliness, exactly. More like a man who had finally grown tired of pretending he wasn't lonely. Claire Whitmore drove into the Texas countryside with a cautious heart. Vermont-born and bred, she was used to green hills, quiet lakes, and people who didn't ask too many questions. The invitation to renovate an old ranch house had come from a third-party firm. No names attached, just a generous budget and a location that promised fresh air. She needed space. She needed distance. And this project, oddly, had felt right. The first time she saw the property, it was dusk. A long gravel drive led to a weathered but beautiful two-story home with wrap-around porches and creaking shutters that whispered of stories not yet told. And then he walked out, Jonas Walker. She didn't show it on her face, but her stomach turned slightly. She had seen his name in business features. His reputation preceded him. Powerful, intense, untouchable. "Ms. Whitmore," he asked, extending a hand. "Claire," she said plainly, her grip firm. "You didn't tell me this was your home." Jonas gave a tight smile. "Didn't want to influence your vision." She didn't respond, just looked around, assessing the space. "What are you looking for in this renovation?" He paused. "Peace and something that feels lived in." Claire raised a brow. "You mean something with soul?" He nodded. "That's a better word." For the next few days, Claire returned again and again, taking measurements, notes, and photographs. Jonas was often there, not hovering, just present. He offered coffee one morning. She accepted. He asked about her design process. She shared a little. One afternoon, as the sun began sinking behind the hills, Claire walked through the empty barn and ran her fingers along the worn wood. "My father used to work with his hands," she said, almost to herself. "He built furniture, not for money, just because it gave him peace." Jonas listened, said nothing. The next day, a small wooden stool appeared in the entryway, handmade, unfinished. Claire didn't ask. The days passed in a slow rhythm. Sketches, silence, soft conversation, and a growing sense of something neither of them dared name. But Claire noticed. She noticed how he asked her opinion and actually listened, how he never touched her without reason, how he sat still when she spoke, as if the world itself had paused. Still, she kept her guard up. She had been through too much, seen too many men like him change their tone when they didn't get what they wanted. But Jonas wasn't pushing. Not yet. That night, as she drove back to her rental house, she pulled over near the ridge overlooking the valley. She sat for a long time, windows down, wind curling into her hair. Something was happening. She could feel it. And for the first time in years, it didn't scare her. It made her wonder. The old ranch house sat quietly beneath the warm Texas sky, like a chapter half written in a dusty novel. Its boards creaked with memory. The wide porch overlooked acres of field where time seemed to slow down. Claire Whitmore took a deep breath and stepped onto the worn steps, clipboard in hand, her boots stirring the red dirt below. Inside, the air smelled faintly of cedar and something older, maybe tobacco, and unfinished endings. She had started bringing small touches with her fabric samples, swatches, and pencil rolls tucked into a leather bag that had belonged to her father. The place reminded her of him, of quiet mornings in Vermont, where the world didn't rush and people fixed things instead of throwing them away. Jonas was already there. "Morning," he said, casually flipping through one of her initial sketches. His sleeves were rolled, and he was barefoot, as if trying to show he belonged in the quiet too. Claire nodded. "Didn't think you'd be this involved." I want to understand the space, he replied, and maybe a little more than that. She didn't bite at the line. Instead, she pointed at the drawing. If you knock this wall down, you'll lose the line of sight to the kitchen. That changes how the space breathes. He looked at her, genuinely curious. Breathes, every house has a rhythm, she said, placing a fingertip lightly along the paper. Some homes are heavy and closed. Others are open, light. You don't change a house, you listen to it. Jonas leaned back, considering her words. And what does this one say? Claire met his eyes, that it used to be loved. But somewhere along the way, someone stopped listening. The silence between them stretched, not uncomfortable, but dense with unspoken things. Each week brought a new step in the process. Claire began spending more time at the ranch, not because she had to, but because something about it settled her. She liked the quiet, the smell of wood being sanded, the way light moved through the windows in the late afternoon. And then there was Jonas. He didn't hover, but he was present, always nearby, never demanding, but never entirely absent either. She would find a cup of coffee waiting on the porch bench, a new chisel added to her toolbox. Once, a book about design philosophies of rural America appeared in her satchel, unmarked but clearly chosen for her. Still, Claire maintained her boundaries. She never stayed past sunset. She never accepted dinner, even when he asked with quiet sincerity. She kept the conversation professional, even when his eyes softened and lingered longer than necessary. Jonas noticed, but he didn't push. Instead, he started asking questions that weren't about the house. What's your favorite color? But only when it's raining. What's the one place you dream of going but haven't told anyone? Did you ever build something just to break it apart? Claire would answer, sometimes briefly, sometimes in surprising detail. The rhythm between them began to shift, like a dance neither had choreographed, but both seemed to know. One late afternoon, while measuring the old staircase, Jonas sat on the bottom step, watching her. You're not what I expected, he said. Most people aren't, she replied. He tilted his head. You have this way, like you're holding your breath, but not out of fear, out of principle. She stopped mid-note, caught off guard by his accuracy. Jonas stood, dusting his hands. You don't let people in easily. Claire looked at him for a moment. I've had to learn the difference between what's real and what's temporary. And which am I? She paused, then gently said, I haven't decided yet. That night, back at her rental, Claire stared at the ceiling longer than usual. There was something undeniably gentle about Jonas when he wasn't trying so hard, a warmth beneath the polished surface. But she didn't trust easily, not anymore, not since Thomas. She hadn't spoken his name in years, not even to herself. A man who had promised permanence but left when she refused to give herself entirely before the wedding. His words still echoed, sharp and dismissive. You're a woman stuck in the wrong decade. Claire had never cried in front of him. She waited until he'd gone, then cried alone in her mother's sewing room. The walls thin enough to hear the clock ticking, but too thick to let grief escape. And now here was Jonas, asking questions she didn't want to answer and giving her silences she wasn't ready for. She was beginning to feel the warmth of possibility, and that terrified her more than solitude ever had. Later that week, she found Jonas in the barn, sitting on an old bench with a blueprint rolled beside him. He didn't hear her approach. "You sketch?" she asked. He looked up, surprised, then smiled. Poorly. She sat beside him, not too close. "Let me see." Jonas handed over the paper. It was rough, a half-formed layout of a garden. Lines too heavy, proportions off, but there was something tender about it. "I didn't know you were thinking of building a garden." "Not for me," he said. "For the space." Claire handed it back. "Then it's already better than half the plans I've seen this year." He looked at her, surprised by the softness in her tone. "You're hard to impress." "I've seen too many things dressed up to look honest," she said. "But this has no ego." For a brief second, neither of them said anything. The breeze moved through the rafters like a whisper of something waiting. That night, Jonas stood alone on the porch, watching the stars spill across the sky. "She's not just different," he said aloud to no one. "She's the first person I've met who makes silence feel full." He didn't know it then, but somewhere in Vermont. Claire sat at a desk, replaying his words about rhythm and breath, wondering if some houses weren't meant to be redesigned, but rediscovered. The mornings in late autumn grew colder. The fields around Jonas's ranch turned a soft gold, and the wind carried a scent of dried grass and wood smoke. The house was changing, walls stripped, old beams sanded smooth, new light pouring into once shadowed corners. But the biggest transformation was quieter, less visible. It was the way Jonas looked at Claire, and the way Claire had begun to hesitate before leaving. One afternoon, she stood in what used to be the dining room, tracing her fingers along the outline of a window that hadn't existed until she suggested it. "This will be the best view in the house," she said. Jonas leaned against the doorway. "Because you imagined it." Claire glanced at him, then turned back to the open frame. "Not everything I imagine becomes real." Jonas hesitated, sensing something in her tone. What didn't Claire was quiet for a long moment. "A future with someone who once told me I was too careful, too principled, too slow." He didn't speak, just stepped inside and sat on the edge of the exposed floor beam. "I was engaged once," she continued, her voice steady, though her fingers clenched. "His name was Thomas. He wanted things I wasn't ready to give, thought love meant surrender of everything." Jonas looked down. "Did you love him?" "I think I loved who I hoped he would be," she said, "but not the man he was when he left." Jonas didn't press further. He only said, "You deserve more than a man who leaves when he doesn't get what he wants." Claire looked at him then, and there was something new in her eyes, not softness, but recognition. A slow cracking of a wall she had built around herself. Later that evening, as Claire was packing up her things, Jonas found a stack of old journals in the attic. One was his mother's. She had passed 5 years ago, and he hadn't touched her belongings until now. Sitting on the edge of the bed, he flipped through faded pages. "Don't mistake silence for strength." One entry read, "Sometimes we women grow quiet not because we're unbreakable, but because we're already broken and stitching ourselves back together." Jonas closed the book, pressing it to his chest. His mother had lived quietly, faithfully, with a husband who took more than he gave. She had smiled through it all, leaving behind a legacy of tenderness no one truly saw. The next morning, he left the journal on Claire's work table with a note. My mother wrote this when no one was listening. I think she would have liked you. Claire found it hours later. She didn't say anything, but her eyes stayed on that book longer than she meant to. That weekend, Claire and Jonas visited a salvage yard in a nearby town. She was hunting for reclaimed wood. He was just looking for time. As they walked among old doors and iron grates, Claire found a carved window frame with ivy etched into the wood. She touched it gently. My grandmother used to have one like this in her kitchen, she said softly. Jonas turned toward her. You never talk about your family. Claire shrugged. There's not much to tell. My parents passed within a year of each other. It was quiet and lonely. Jonas didn't say I'm sorry. He just nodded, and they stood in silence for a long moment, surrounded by forgotten pieces of other people's lives. That evening, they worked late in the house. Jonas helped sand down a table Claire had chosen to restore. Their hands brushed. Claire looked away. Jonas paused, watching her. Do I make you uncomfortable? She took a breath. No, not uncomfortable, just unsure. Of me, of myself, she admitted. Jonas set down the sander. You don't have to figure it out tonight. She smiled faintly. That's the first time someone said that and meant it. Later, as she was leaving, Jonas walked her to her car. The sky was clear and full of stars. He handed her a wrapped package. What's this? She asked. A book I found in your studio, one you mentioned wanting years ago. It's out of print. Claire opened the wrapping just enough to see the cover. She paused. How did you? I listen, he said simply. She didn't speak again, just held the book close, then drove away without another word. Jonas stood in the driveway long after her taillights disappeared. Inside, he sat at the table they'd sanded together and stared at the space she'd brought back to life. Something was shifting in him, not because of a bet, not because of a plan, but because of how quiet she made him feel inside. Not empty, whole. The days shortened. Mornings came with frost on the grass, and the wood stove in the ranch house worked overtime. Inside, the scent of paint, old cedar, and coffee lingered like memory. Claire had started arriving earlier, staying later. She no longer looked at her watch after 5 and Jonas had stopped pretending he wasn't waiting for her to walk through the door each morning. The house was beginning to feel like it belonged to both of them, or at least like it had been waiting for them. One Wednesday afternoon, Claire unrolled her final layout on the dining room table. Jonas stood beside her, quietly absorbing the sketches and notes. The plans were brilliant warm earth tones, minimalistic lines, and small details that gave character without clutter. Jonas pointed at a note in the margin. It was written in delicate cursive, "Let it breathe where silence used to be." "You wrote this?" he asked. Claire smiled. "It's from one of your mother's journal entries." Jonas froze. "I hope that's okay," she added quickly. It felt right, like something this house would understand. He didn't answer. Instead, he reached for the page, tracing the words slowly. "You've read more of them, only the ones you left out. They feel intimate, like she's still here." He didn't say anything, just turned and walked into the kitchen without a word. Claire stared after him, confused. Minutes passed. She followed him, wiping her hands on a cloth. "Did I cross a line?" Jonas turned slowly. His face was unreadable. Those were her private thoughts. I know, and I only used what I thought honored her. It's not about the house, he said quietly, almost bitterly. It's about who you let in and why. Claire blinked, caught off guard. Jonas, if I made you uncomfortable, I'm sorry. I just thought you understood something that wasn't yours to understand. He snapped. She stepped back, stunned. Jonas saw it, the flash of hurt in her eyes, and immediately regretted it. Claire. But she was already gathering her bag. I'll come back tomorrow. You clearly need space. Before he could stop her, she was out the door. That night, Jonas sat alone at the long kitchen table, his mother's journal open in front of him. His hands trembled. He hadn't been angry with Claire. Not really. He had been terrified because she was getting close. Too close. Close enough to see the man behind the plan. The one who hadn't started this whole thing with pure intentions. The one who had made a silent bet with himself, whispered into a glass of whiskey in a moment of wounded pride. 6 months. She'll be my wife, but now he no longer wanted to win. He wanted to deserve her, and that terrified him more than failure ever had. The next day, Claire didn't come, nor the day after. Jonas called the design firm, asked about her schedule. She took 2 days off. They told him, didn't say why. He paced the house like a restless ghost. Then, on Saturday morning, she returned. No announcement, no knock. She walked into the living room, where Jonas was sanding down the mantel, and set a brown paper bag on the table. Inside was a mug, handmade, slightly uneven, painted with pale blue glaze, and a single word carved on the bottom, stillness. Jonas looked up at her. You made this. She nodded. At a workshop back home, years ago. I almost left it behind when I moved. Why bring it now? Claire met his eyes, because I forgot how still I feel here, until the other day. A silence passed between them. Jonas stepped forward. I'm sorry. I lashed out because I was scared. Of what? Of how close you were getting. Of what that meant. Claire nodded. You don't have to explain everything, but I want to, he said gently. They stood there for a moment, closer than before, but not quite touching. Then Jonas asked, Will you stay for dinner tonight? Claire hesitated. If it's just dinner, he smiled. Just dinner. That evening, they ate by candlelight. Not because Jonas planned it that way, but because the power flickered out halfway through cooking. He lit a few candles, opened a bottle of wine, and pulled out the pot pie Claire had brought from her freezer stash. They talked, laughed. She teased him about his inability to dice onions properly. After dessert, just a handful of sugar cookies, they sat on the porch swing. The sky was full of stars, and the air smelled of pine and wind. Jonas turned to her. You once said, not everything you imagined becomes real. Claire looked at him. Yes, he hesitated. Would it be all right if I imagined you? Here, she didn't answer right away. Instead, she leaned back and whispered, Only if you're honest with why you want it. Jonas opened his mouth to reply, but the words caught in his throat, because he wasn't ready to say it yet. Not fully. Claire sensed it. She stood slowly, brushing her hands on her jeans. Good night, Jonas? And this time, when she walked away, She didn't look back. The wedding was simple. No orchestra, no press, just Claire in a soft ivory dress, hair pinned up with a single lavender bloom, and Jonas in a navy suit that had never felt more real than that afternoon. They stood beneath the sycamore tree behind the ranch house, with Tom, the only guest, and ordained for the day, reading their vows with a voice as steady as the Texas wind. "I do," Claire whispered. Jonas said the same, and meant it with a depth he hadn't known he had. The kiss was brief, reverent, and then they were husband and wife. Claire's hands trembled slightly as she held her bouquet of wildflowers, not from fear, but from the gravity of the moment. For the first time in years, she had chosen to trust. Jonas held her hand a little tighter than necessary, as if already afraid she might slip away. Their honeymoon cabin sat nestled in the Bitterroot Mountains of Montana, hours from the nearest town. Jonas had planned every detail: wood-burning stove, a wide porch with rocking chairs, and a clawfoot tub beneath a skylight. Claire stepped inside with quiet awe. "This feels untouched," she said. Jonas smiled. "It reminded me of you." For 3 days they wandered trails, cooked over fire, and played cards at night beneath oil lamps. Claire laughed more in those 3 days than she had in 3 years. She even let him win a few games of gin rummy. On the 4th night, the air turned crisp. Jonas built a fire in the stone hearth. Claire disappeared into the small bathroom with a bundle of soft linen. When she returned, her hair was damp, curled gently over her shoulders, and she wore a long white nightgown that shimmered like morning frost. He turned around and stopped. She looked uncertain, more fragile than he'd ever seen her. "Are you cold?" he asked softly. "No," she whispered, "just thinking." He reached out his hand. She took it, but before he could lead her closer, Claire drew in a breath, steadying herself. "I need to tell you something," she said. Jonas froze. "I've never." Her voice faltered, then returned with quiet clarity. "I've never been with anyone before. I've never given myself." She searched his eyes. "I waited, not out of fear, but because I wanted it to be real, with someone who truly saw me." Jonas's stomach dropped. Her honesty was a gift, a raw, sacred truth offered with trembling courage. And in that instant, guilt struck him like lightning, because she had waited for love, and he had begun with a lie. He didn't speak. He couldn't. Claire noticed the change in his eyes first. Not confusion, not hesitation, but something colder, deeper. Her smile faded. "Jonas," his hands fell to his sides. "Please," she said, her voice smaller now. "Tell me you're here with me." He took a step back, then sat on the edge of the bed like a man who'd just forgotten how to breathe. Claire moved closer. "Jonas, what is it?" He looked up slowly, the weight of his silence wrapped around them both. And then, without excuse or spin, he said it. "I made a bet." She blinked. "What?" He swallowed hard. "The first time you said no to dinner, I was so used to being in control, I told myself I'd change your mind. Told my friend that in 6 months you'd be my wife." Claire didn't move, didn't blink, didn't breathe. So this was, her voice cracked, a game. "No," he said quickly. "It started that way, but it changed. I changed." She backed away. "I swear to you, Claire, somewhere along the way, the bet didn't matter. You became everything you bet on me, she whispered. No, I mean, yes, at first, but it wasn't about that anymore. It was never meant to get this far. I didn't mean to fall in love with you. Tears filled her eyes. You didn't mean to. He stood. Claire, don't. Her voice was cold now. You looked me in the eyes and promised a future. And all along, you were just trying to win. It stopped being that long ago, Jonas said. Desperate. I don't care about the bet. I care about you. You let me give myself to you, she said, her voice breaking now. You let me believe it was real, that you were real. It is real, he said. It became real. Claire looked away, arms wrapped tightly around herself. Then she turned. I don't care what it became. I care how it began. Jonas reached for her. She stepped back. Her eyes weren't angry. They were worse. They were filled with disappointment. Then she said the words he would never forget. I waited for someone who would choose me first, and you never did. She walked to the door, barefoot, the night air biting her skin. Jonas followed. Claire, please, don't go. We can fix this. She shook her head. Some things don't need fixing, she whispered. They just need to be left behind. And then she disappeared into the cold. Claire left before sunrise. She didn't take a flight. She didn't leave a note. She packed her things with trembling hands, boarded a small bus heading east, and didn't look back. As the mountains receded, so did everything she thought she knew. The morning light spilled over the seat beside her, empty and cold. She stared at her reflection in the window for hours, wondering who she was now. A wife, a woman betrayed, and something else, something she didn't dare name yet, back in Vermont. Her apartment greeted her like an old friend who no longer knew how to comfort her. The walls were the same, the furniture untouched, but she was not. She sat on the edge of her bed, shoes still on, and cried without sound. Jonas returned to the ranch with the silence of a man who had finally been emptied. He didn't speak to Tom. He didn't answer messages. The house echoed with memories that now cut deep. Her coffee mug sat on the porch railing. Her scarf still hung on the hook by the door. Each piece of her presence remained, like whispers reminding him what he'd lost. But he didn't remove them. Not yet. Instead, he went back to the barn and picked up a hammer. He didn't know what he was building, only that he needed to build something. Anything. Claire didn't see anyone for days. Sophie, her best friend since childhood, came by without knocking. She brought soup, clean towels, and something heavier presents. You don't have to say anything, Sophie said, wrapping an arm around her. Just breathe. Claire leaned into her shoulder and closed her eyes. Weeks passed. Jonas began to write letters. He didn't send them. He kept them in a drawer beside his bed, pages filled with things he couldn't say out loud. Apologies, memories, regrets that poured like ink too dark to erase. He stopped shaving, stopped wearing shoes inside. He cooked for himself for the first time in years. His hands blistered, then hardened. One day, he built a bench from reclaimed wood, rough, uneven, but solid. He placed it under the sycamore tree where they had said their vows. Then he sat and waited. Claire tried to move forward. She returned to work, picked up small design projects, kept her answers short, smiled when people asked how the honeymoon was. She learned how to lie with grace. But something was off. She blamed the nausea on stress, then the missed cycle. It wasn't until the morning she fainted in the kitchen that Sophie dragged her to the clinic. 2 pink lines. 5 weeks. Claire sat in the quiet of the exam room, the paper gown rustling softly. She didn't cry, didn't flinch. She just breathed. A heartbeat already forming inside her, a life, not planned, but real. That night, she sat on her porch in a thick sweater, legs pulled up to her chest. Sophie came out, holding a cup of tea. "I won't ask," she said, setting it down. Claire looked up. "I'm pregnant." Sophie didn't gasp. She just nodded. "Do you want him to know?" Claire shook her head. "Not yet. Maybe not at all. He has the right to know, but I also have the right to feel safe." Sophie placed a hand on hers. "You're not alone. I just—" Claire's voice broke. "I wanted my child to grow up knowing love, not a love that started with a lie." She placed her hand gently over her stomach. "I will protect this baby, even if I have to do it alone." 2 weeks later, a photo surfaced online. Claire leaving a pharmacy, holding prenatal vitamins. No sunglasses, no coat, just her hand, instinctively resting over her belly. By midnight, Jonas had seen it. He stared at the screen, unmoving. She was pregnant. She hadn't told him. And yet, he understood. He sat with the photo for a long time, then opened the drawer where he kept the letters. He added a new one. This time, it wasn't for Claire. It was for the baby. The next morning, Claire opened her door to find a small white box. Inside, the highest quality prenatal vitamins available. No sender name, just a note. "Not for me, for the baby." She clutched the note to her chest and closed her eyes. For the first time in weeks, she allowed herself to hope. The box of vitamins was only the beginning. Claire didn't know how he found the right kind, or why he knew she couldn't keep anything down but the gentle-coated ones. But she didn't ask. She didn't send them back. She just kept them on the kitchen shelf, next to the tea bags Sophie always restocked. A few days later, another package arrived. No note this time. Just a small, linen-covered book, Healthy Pregnancy for Independent Moms. Inside the cover was a folded page, handwritten in that same simple, blocky print she remembered from Jonas's sketch notes. "I'm not asking for forgiveness, only a chance to protect you and the baby, this time with honesty." Claire closed the book and placed her hand over her stomach. She wasn't ready to forgive, but somehow the anger was no longer there. 3 blocks from her apartment sat a vacant studio space, once used by an art collective. It had long been closed until one afternoon when Claire found a single key in her mailbox. No address, just the word "begin" burned into a small tag of pine wood. She knew. Her feet carried her before her mind could resist. The studio had been transformed. White walls, wide windows. A restored oak desk sat in the center. Blank sketchbooks, fresh pencils in a hand-carved holder. An easel near the window, facing the quiet street. Nothing extravagant, nothing flashy. Just light and space and understanding. Claire stood in the doorway for a long time, heart aching in ways she didn't expect. He knew her, not from observation, but from paying attention, from listening when she didn't speak. She didn't call him, but she came back the next day, and the one after that. She didn't design, not yet. She just sat in the sunlight and let her breath find a rhythm again. Then came the lavender, A small plant appeared on her desk one morning. No tag, no explanation, just a pot of fresh purple blooming silently, smelling like the hills of home, her favorite. She didn't react, but the next time she watered it, she whispered, "Thank you." Jonas never showed his face, but he was always there, in the things that quietly fixed themselves. The hallway light outside her apartment had flickered for months until one rainy night. It didn't. The shelf in the bathroom she never had time to hang installed one afternoon while she was out. A paper bag with homemade toast and applesauce safe for nausea left at her door every Monday morning. No signature, no pressure, just presence. Claire began to draw again. Slow lines, curved edges. Nothing for a client, just for her. She let music play. She opened the window. She cried without shame, without Sophie needing to ask why. One morning, as she reached for an old sketchbook, a folded note slipped free. It was tucked into a page from months ago, a design for the ranch kitchen that had never been used. The note read, "If you'll allow it, I'd like to walk beside you, not as someone asking to be forgiven, but simply as a father." Claire sat still for a long time. Then she picked up the phone. Jonas answered on the second ring. His voice was quieter than she remembered. "Hello? I need help hanging some floating shelves," Claire said. Pause. Then, "I'll be there in 10. When he arrived, he didn't bring flowers. He brought a level, a power drill, and a calm that hadn't been there before. They didn't hug. They didn't cry. They just got to work. Afterward, she made tea. They sat on opposite ends of the bench under the window. "How are you and the baby?" he asked softly. Claire looked down at her belly, now showing under the soft layers of her sweater. "We're okay," she said, still learning how to breathe without hurting. Jonas nodded. "I won't stay," he said, rising. "Just wanted you to know I'm here when you're ready." She watched him leave, didn't call him back, but she didn't close the door either. From that day, Jonas began to reappear, never suddenly, never loudly. A new design book tucked on her shelf, a bowl of citrus left near the window when winter began. Sometimes she'd walk into the studio and feel like something was warmer, and she knew. She knew it was him, and she let it happen, because healing doesn't arrive all at once. It comes like sunlight through dusty glass, quiet and slow. October came in quietly. Leaves turned amber along the Vermont sidewalks. Claire's belly had rounded into something undeniable. Strangers began to offer her seats on buses. Shopkeepers smiled a little longer. She moved slower now, but there was a steadiness to her, like a tree that had survived many winters. The studio had become her second home. She filled its walls with sketches, soft pencil lines mapping out not just designs, but her own unfolding. Some days she still found things changed. A warm blanket folded neatly on the chair, a new kettle already boiling when she arrived. And every time she knew he wasn't asking for attention. He was leaving pieces of presents behind. Then, one rainy afternoon, Jonas knocked. No umbrella, no flowers, just wet hair and sincerity. Claire opened the door slowly. He looked down at her belly and smiled, tired, grateful. "I just wanted to ask," he said softly, "how are you and the baby?" She didn't answer right away. Then, with eyes softer than they'd ever been, she said, "We're okay, still learning how to breathe without hurting." Jonas nodded, water dripping down his collar. "I won't stay," he added. "Just, I'm here." He turned to go. "Jonas," she said. He paused. "I do need help." With a hallway shelf, his breath caught. "I'm on my way." From then on, he returned sparingly, respectfully. A paper bag of groceries, a chair she mentioned once, fixed and painted in the color she loved most. She never asked him to stay, but she never turned him away either. And over time, the silence between them changed. It no longer held pain. It held possibility. Oliver came into the world on a quiet Thursday. The hospital room was warm, the lights dimmed, the nurses kind. Claire gripped the edge of the bed, sweat dotting her brow. Jonas never left her side. He held her hand through every contraction. He whispered when she needed strength, and stayed silent when words were too much. And when the doctor placed the crying infant on her chest, Claire wept not from pain, but from something far more sacred, completion. She looked at the tiny face, the small fists balled tightly near her collarbone. And in that moment, she wasn't broken. She was whole. The next morning, Jonas sat beside her hospital bed, holding Oliver like he was something made of starlight. He looked down at the baby, then up at Claire. "I wrote something," he said. He reached into his coat and pulled out a folded piece of paper, no envelope, just raw, creased truth. "I'm not proposing with a diamond," he began, his voice shaking. "I'm proposing with sleepless nights, with morning bottles and lullabies I haven't learned yet, with the things I'll fix before you ask, and the mistakes I'll admit when I make them." He paused, glancing down at Oliver's sleeping face. "I'm not promising perfection, just presence. Not a castle, just a home. If you say yes this time, I promise to never take love for granted again." Claire stared at him for a long time. Then, with tears that didn't need to be wiped away, she nodded. She didn't speak. Her answer was not in words. It was in trust, rebuilt from silence and action and months of just showing up. They remarried 4 months later. No white dress, no audience, just the soft rustle of wind through winter branches, a backyard fire, and Oliver laughing in his father's arms. Tom officiated again, this time with red cheeks and damp eyes. "Third time's the charm," he joked quietly. Claire smiled, but Jonas didn't laugh. He only looked at her like a man who had learned the weight of what it meant to be chosen. That night, after the guests were gone and Oliver had fallen asleep, Jonas stood in the nursery, swaying gently with the baby pressed against his chest. He looked down at the boy, his son, and whispered, "It started as a game, little one, but your mom, she made me a man worth loving." Claire stood in the doorway, watching, not saying a word, because some moments don't need sound, only presence, only love. In life, trust is often the most fragile gift we can offer and the most difficult one to rebuild once broken. This story reminds us that love is not defined by grand gestures or perfect beginnings, but by the quiet courage to show up again and again, even after we've failed. Jonas began with pride and deception, but through loss, he learned that real love requires humility, patience, and presence. Claire, though wounded deeply, shows us that healing doesn't mean forgetting. It means choosing peace over bitterness and strength over silence. For those of us who've lived long enough to carry our share of regrets, This story speaks to a timeless truth. It's never too late to become someone worthy of love. Not by erasing the past, but by honoring the present and committing to do better, moving forward. Whether you've been hurt or you've hurt someone else, there is always a way back, not through promises, but through quiet acts of care, given consistently over time. Because sometimes the most powerful "I love you" isn't said with words, but with a presence that never walks away again. Thank you for joining us on this heartfelt journey. If this story touched a part of you, made you reflect, remember, or simply feel, please consider giving it a like, sharing it with someone who needs it, and subscribing to our channel for more stories that speak to the quiet corners of the heart. Your support means the world to us and helps these stories reach others who may need a moment of healing, hope, or simply to feel seen. Until next time, stay kind, stay open, and keep listening.